the world outside the high-wire fences still turns, bathed in the silent grandeur of ancient redwood trees. But here, where the sun reaches only through a 5-meter slot of concrete and wire, time itself is held still. This is the paradoxical boundary of the prison known as Pelican Bay, the quiet geometry of stone and grief. The paradox of the place begins with its very location. For miles around, the air is thick with the scent of pine and ocean salt, a cool, clean perfume rising from the towering groves of Northern California. These are the redwood forests, organisms that measure their lives not in years, but in millennia. They are the oldest living architecture, vast and patient, watching the slow turning of the Earth's clock. Yet nestled within this ancient grove, on a flat plain near the sea, stands a structure of absolute modern geometry, the state-of-the-art super-maximum security prison of Pelican Bay. It is a place built to deny nature, to stop time, and to contain the chaotic forces of the human will. This citadel of confinement was conceived in the late 1980s and opened in the early 1990s, a direct response to a rise in organized, predatory violence within the existing prison systems of the state. The older prisons, vast and sprawling, had become unwilling hosts to internal gang hierarchies that operated with brutal autonomy. The state, seeking to reassert control, decreed that a new kind of prison was needed, one designed specifically to sever the connections that made this internal command structure possible. Pelican Bay was thus built not merely as a place of punishment, but as a surgical instrument of isolation. It is a massive complex, divided into several distinct sections, each managing different levels of risk and control. At any given moment, this entire facility may hold more than 3,000 individuals, each serving lengthy sentences for crimes ranging from homicide and sexual assault to violent, racketeering, and high-level organized criminal activity. These are not first-time offenders, nor are they those deemed capable of rehabilitation in a standard setting. They are the men who have demonstrated a fundamental inability or unwillingness to abide by societal law, even the laws of the prison yard. For many, the sentence to Pelican Bay is a quiet pronouncement that they are unlikely to ever leave the custody of the state, their lives measured out year by year until they become a memory. The entire structure speaks a language of unyielding boundaries. The external perimeter is a high fence of double chain-link mesh, topped with coiled razor wire and monitored by sophisticated sensors that detect the slightest vibration. Beyond this, the inner world of the prison unfolds, segmented into distinct general population yards and, most critically, the isolation units that give the facility its fearsome reputation. Life in the general population, though harsh by any external measure, is marked by the constant low-frequency pressure of conflict. The tension is palpable, a heavy silence pregnant with foreboding. These large yards are the battlegrounds where the war between rival gangs is fought, not in large-scale medieval clashes, but in swift, sudden moments of extreme violence. These clashes between rival factions, often drawn along strict racial and cultural lines, are a persistent, inescapable feature of the life within. The authorities speak with grim certainty about the frequency of these events. In a typical month, knife attacks are not an uncommon occurrence. The violence often flares up quickly, sparked by a perceived slight, a territorial encroachment, or the settling of a years-old score. whispered between blocks. The consequences of these internal wars are tragically fixed. Since the prison opened its heavy gates in the 1990s, the number of detainees who lost their lives at the hands of their fellow inmates or by the necessary intervention of the prison staff has reached nearly 24. 5 of these fatalities occurred when correctional officers tasked with restoring order in a chaotic yard were forced to discharge their weapons. Each statistic is a quiet marker of the deep, volatile current running beneath the surface of the institution. This ceaseless internal warfare demands constant vigilance from the prison governors. One of the most telling indicators of the underlying hostility is the endless recovery of forbidden tools. The manufacture of illegal weapons, known within the walls as shanks or shivs, is an act of profound defiance and a daily hazard. These are not weapons of grand design, but instruments of necessity, crafted with incredible ingenuity from fragments of steel, plastic, or even sharpened toothbrushes. Lieutenant Thomas, a correctional officer with long experience in the facility, keeps a curated collection of these confiscated weapons, a grim museum of inmate resourcefulness. The array is startling in its variety and lethal in its purpose. Simple pieces of sharpened metal, often wrapped in strips of cloth for a better grip, or jagged ceramic edges pulled from broken fixtures. These crude tools represent a continuous, silent rebellion against the state's absolute control of force. The act of seizing these weapons is itself a tense and often disturbing ritual. Officers must wear heavy rubber gloves, not just for protection, but because of the nature of their concealment. Inmates, desperate to retain their means of self-defense or attack, often store these weapons in areas of their body that defy conventional searching, using their own bodies as the final barrier of their personal armory. The simple phrase, "I don't want to have anything to do with that," speaks volumes about the level of desperation and the intimacy of the violence that pervades these walls. Furthermore, the technology of the guard is constantly evolving to combat the ingenuity of the prisoner. In the administrative offices, a cold clinical light shines down on an X-ray screen. An officer points to a faint shadow on the film, a small, distinct shape in the image of a man's anatomy. It is half a pair of scissors, precisely and secretly stored in the rectum of an inmate. A stark reminder that the simplest objects can be transformed into lethal contraband, and that the war here is fought in millimeters and shadows. Illegal weapons, uprisings, and aggressive, non-compliant behavior. When the inmate commits one of these acts, they trigger the final, inescapable response of the system. The consequence for breaking the established, necessary rules of the prison, for disrupting the already fragile peace of the general population, is severe and predictable. It is a sentence to a prison within a prison, a place feared by all who dwell within these walls. The cost of that defiance is time, often at least 2 years, spent in the absolute solitude of the security housing unit, the supermax. The paradox of the ancient grove and the towering redwoods outside gives way to the quiet geometry of the internal structure. Here, the world is reduced to its barest components: concrete, steel, and silence. This is the ultimate confinement, the deliberate severing of all but the most basic sensory connections. This citadel of isolation stands only 100 meters from the main prison building, a short distance away. yet it represents a catastrophic change of regime. The general population cells, though small, still have a window, still allow a small sliver of external light to enter, still offer the most minimal connection to the distant world. But the Security Housing Unit, the SHU, is designed in a way that denies even this small comfort. The architecture is unyielding. There are no true windows in the SHU. The cells are engineered to prevent sight, designed so that the inmates have only verbal access to other prisoners. They never actually see a fellow inmate unless they are being moved out of their cell, a rare, highly orchestrated event. The outside world is filtered out, and the internal world is reduced to muffled voices, the metallic groan of doors, and the unceasing internal monologue of the isolated mind. The ultimate aim of this architecture is to neutralize the source of the persistent chaos. The leaders of the internal gangs, the most violently disruptive individuals, and those who cannot be separated in the general population are moved to this unit. The belief is that by completely severing their visual, physical, and organizational links, the entire internal hierarchy that fuels the violence can be dismantled and neutralized. The environment itself becomes the final, most effective correctional officer, ensuring a quiet, though profoundly oppressive, peace. The simple question from the courtyard: when was the last time you saw, for example, a tree? Serves as a quiet indictment of this design. The most potent natural symbol of life and persistent growth is placed in stark juxtaposition with a world that has consciously decided to remove every trace of organic life and unconstrained form. The towering redwoods outside stand sentinel to an order they cannot understand. This absolute severance from the natural world sets the stage for the true conflict of the supermax. This is not a war of muscle and blade, but a slow, continuous attrition against the individual mind, a psychological siege waged by stone and time. The physical confinement is absolute, but the struggle for sanity, for a sliver of personal space and control, must now be fought entirely within the skull. The fate of a man is here defined by his past actions, encapsulated by the simple knowledge that he is a part of this uniquely dangerous population, deserving of this ultimate separation. The system, once triggered, proceeds with the quiet, devastating certainty of cosmic law, delivering its sentence not through fire, but through the endless, echoing silence of the concrete whole. The next stages of this confinement will reveal the precise, ritualistic measures taken to maintain control over this isolated population, detailing how the most basic necessities of life, from food to exercise, are managed under the constant shadow of potential, unseen violence. Life behind the wine-dark gate. Like a dark stain upon the northern coast, this institution holds 3,500 men. The population, defined by the violence they visited upon the world, lives under a constant state of simmering conflict, where old grudges are never settled, only postponed. The vast majority of the detainees here reside in what is known as the general population, or simply the main line. These are the large housing units where men convicted of serious and often unspeakable offenses serve their time in conditions that are crowded, volatile, and profoundly hierarchical. For the authorities, the central, consuming challenge of managing this population is the sheer, uncompromising reality of the violence that defines it. Pelican Bay was designed to be a modern fortress, a place where order would be mechanically imposed upon chaos. But within any closed society of this size, particularly one defined by long sentences and absolute despair, a secondary, self-imposed structure will always rise. Here, that structure is the power of the prison gang. These are rigid, highly organized hierarchies that operate with the discipline of a paramilitary organization and the ruthlessness of a criminal enterprise. The history of the prison system in the state of California is inseparable from the history of these gangs. They grew from small, ethnically or regionally aligned groups seeking self-protection, but over decades, they became sophisticated criminal organizations with influence that reaches far beyond the prison walls. Within Pelican Bay, the power of these groups is felt in every yard, every cell block, and every hour of the day. The tension they create is the atmosphere that every detainee breathes. It is a heavy, ambient hum of foreboding, a quiet understanding that the rules of the state are only one layer of law. The other is the immutable, often brutal, law of the yard. This internal law dictates who may speak to whom, where a man may walk, and what debts must be paid. To violate this code is to invite a swift and irreversible reckoning. The prison system itself often organizes the population along racial and ethnic lines in an attempt to manage and, in some sense, contain the conflict. But this organization only formalizes the divisions, creating segregated communities where hostility is the defining characteristic. The smallest perceived slight, a territorial encroachment during exercise, or even an unintentional glance across a yard can become the spark for a sudden and fatal conflagration. The violence here is rarely the result of spontaneous emotional rage. It is often calculated, planned, and executed with cold precision. It takes the form of race riots that can involve dozens of men, or the silent, sudden tragedy of an attempted knife attack in the exercise yard, where a piece of forbidden steel is produced and used in an instant, turning a routine hour of movement into a scene of chaotic emergency. These incidents are more than just clashes. They are the settling of scores, the enforcement of internal laws, and the chilling confirmation of the gang's power. The consequences of this continuous internal war are measured not just in wounds and administrative reports, but in the finality of loss of life. Since the heavy gates of Pelican Bay opened in the early 1990s, the official count of detainees who lost their lives at the hands of their fellow inmates or during necessary interventions by the correctional officers is a somber measure of the life inside. The number of violent fatalities within the facility has risen to nearly 24 men. These individuals, already serving time for grievous crimes, met their final end not in a court-ordered execution, but in the chaotic, immediate brutality of the yard or the cell block. It is a life lived in constant, close proximity to the risk of finality. Of these fatalities, 5 men were shot and lost their lives at the hands of prison guards. This is a cold, stark statistic that speaks to the moments of absolute, desperate emergency faced by the officers. In the event of a large-scale riot or a life-threatening hostage situation, when the use of non-lethal force is no longer possible, the officers must use their sidearms or shotguns to restore order. This is the ultimate terrible price of the chaos that the facility was built to contain. The memory of these fatalities hangs in the air, a persistent reminder to both the population and the staff of the razor-thin margin between order and disaster. Beyond the visible violence, the ongoing war is characterized by a relentless, silent effort to subvert the state's authority. This subversion is best symbolized by the endless, tireless manufacture of weapons within the cell blocks. Every week, the prison governors report the uncovering of more contraband weapons, instruments forged from the most mundane, forgotten materials. This constant discovery is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of an unceasing, foundational conflict. The prisoner's ingenuity in this regard is often astounding and profoundly unsettling. A sharpened piece of metal strapping, taken from the edge of a bed frame and filed to a needle point, becomes a devastating shank. A simple plastic spoon, heated and molded, can be sharpened into a hard, unforgiving knife. These are tools born of necessity, tools of self-defense, and tools of organized attack. The correctional officers, through necessity, develop an almost intuitive understanding of where these items might be hidden and the desperate lengths to which men will go to keep them. The constant search and seizure is a ritualistic war against the infinitesimal. It highlights the fact that in a world of total deprivation, the value of a single, small, sharp object rises to a status of absolute, life-saving worth. The entire environment, from the architecture of the blocks to the rhythm of the daily routine, is a response to this deep-seated, persistent threat of violence. Every precaution, every rule, every separation is put in place because the population has, over time, proven their capacity for and reliance upon extreme violence. They are the individuals who cannot successfully integrate into any large group without that integration dissolving into a power struggle defined by blood. The officers themselves live and work under this permanent state of alert. Their routine is a sequence of slow, deliberate movements designed to minimize opportunities for chaos. A measured pace that seems to crawl beneath the urgency of the conflict. The sheer difficulty of the task is often summarized by the facility's staff. They are managing individuals who have committed the most grievous acts, who are serving the longest sentences, and who have formed the most organized and violent hierarchies. It is a population that sees decades, often a lifetime, ahead of them inside the walls, and therefore measures their actions not by the consequence of a short sentence, but by the immutable, long-term rules of their internal society. When the violence and aggressive behavior finally reaches a point that can no longer be tolerated, when an inmate repeatedly violates the laws of the house, the final consequence is delivered. The prisoner is removed from the main line, from the general population, and transferred to the SHU. This is the ultimate, severe answer to illegal weapons, uprisings, and aggressive behavior. The removal is a stark and final message. The individual's violence is so profound, so disruptive to the fragile order, that they must be completely severed from the society of men. They must pay an extremely heavy price, at least 2 years in an isolation cell, a place where the chaos of the gang rivalry is replaced by the far deeper, colder threat of profound solitude. This isolation is feared far more than any physical beating or injury, for it threatens the very fabric of the self. The silence and the stone replace the constant, dangerous presence of the rival, and the battle shifts entirely inward. The transfer to the security housing unit is the final, predictable consequence of a life spent breaking rules, a path that leads away from the conflict of the many and into the long internal silence of the One. The art of forbidden steel. Weapons forged in the dark. Rebellion is never silent, even in stone. Every week, the guardians of the wall uncover relics of war, weapons fashioned from the forgotten fragments of the civilized world, symbols of an unceasing internal defiance. The conflict inside. Pelican Bay is a slow, methodical war of ingenuity waged against the system's total control over materials. The state dictates what may exist within the walls: steel, concrete, plastic, and cloth, all standardized and strictly accounted for. Yet the inmates, driven by the profound need for defense, status, or predatory force, find ways to transmute these base materials into instruments of destruction. This is the art of forbidden steel, the silent, ceaseless practice of weapons manufacturing within the cell block. Lieutenant Thomas, a correctional officer with long tenure in the facility, serves as a curator of this grim artistry. His collection of confiscated weapons is not merely evidence, it is a profound historical archive of the ongoing struggle. What you see before you is just a small portion of the items that have been discovered over time, each piece representing a profound failure of the surveillance system and a testament to the unquenchable ingenuity of the human will. 2. Harm. The instruments themselves vary wildly in their design, but all share a commitment to simplicity and lethality. Some are long, slender shards of steel, painstakingly ground against the concrete floor until they possess a needle-like point. Others are shorter, thicker pieces of ceramic or plastic, salvaged from broken fixtures, items meant to be disposable, but which in this environment gain the value of a finely crafted blade. A common material is the metal strapping used for bed frames or ventilation, sharpened at one end and wrapped in strips of cloth torn from prison uniforms for a makeshift handle. This transformation, this alchemy of the ordinary into the lethal, is what defines the constant threat. The existence of these shanks, or shivs, as they are known in the internal lexicon, immediately elevates the level of tension for the staff. Every pat-down, every cell search, and every movement of a prisoner becomes a matter of life and loss of life, because the precise location of the latest invention is always unknown. The officers required to handle these items must proceed with a detached, necessary caution. Lieutenant Thomas speaks of the ritual of wearing gloves, a simple measure that belies the profound nature of the encounter. He observes that he wears these gloves because inmates keep these weapons stored in areas of their body that he does not want to have anything to do with at this point. This clinical statement addresses the reality of concealment, the ultimate boundary defiance. The body itself becomes the final, most secure storage unit, a deep and profoundly private armory. It is an act of total ownership over the last remaining territory, the self. The sophistication of the concealment is often more disturbing than the weapons themselves. In the search for these items, the administration must use technologies that probe beyond the surface. One such technique is the use of the X-ray, which allows the officers to peer into the hidden world of the inmate's anatomy. If you look up into the light on the X-ray, you can see the faint, sharp outline of a foreign object. It is a portion of a pair of scissors, precisely half of a pair, that was secreted in a man's rectum. This is a cold, stark image of absolute commitment. The sheer physical discomfort, the risk of injury, and and the constant psychological burden required to carry such an item speaks volumes about the level of fear and determination that drives men within these walls. The scissors, a common, simple tool of the civilized world, are here transformed into a terrifying, personalized tool of aggression, a relic carried into the deepest recesses of the self. This ceaseless flow of illegal weapons, often made by inmates who work quietly in the darkness of their cells, is not merely a sign of disobedience. It is a practical necessity for the internal politics of the gangs. These shanks are the currency of power. They are used to enforce the silent laws of the internal order, to punish perceived weakness, to settle those years-old scores, and to protect territory within the yards. The constant discovery of a weapon is therefore an act of state control that directly destabilizes the power of the gangs. The most profound danger of this contraband is the unpredictable nature of its use. A riot may begin with shouting, but it escalates instantly when one of these items is introduced. The speed of the violence, the sudden, silent production of a sharp, unforgiving edge, is what makes the prison environment so profoundly volatile. The constant confiscation and the persistent reinvention of new weapons creates a cycle of action and reaction. The guards ban certain materials, the inmates find substitutes. The guards increase the frequency of searches, the inmates increase the sophistication of their hiding places. It is a slow-motion, continuous attrition that never truly ends, but only changes its form. Beyond the physical danger of the weapons, there is the silent, psychological burden they place upon the entire population. The simple knowledge that a man standing next to you may be armed with a crude, lethal blade transforms every interaction into a moment of potential peril. It breeds a state of constant, low-grade fear that seeps into every routine, every meal, and every period of exercise. The art of forbidden steel is a grim counterpoint to the architecture of confinement. The state builds thick walls and strong doors to contain the prisoners, but the prisoners prove that the most profound forms of rebellion can be contained within the smallest, most negligible pieces of metal or plastic. The power to inflict harm and the willingness to do so remains one of the last, most fundamental freedoms that the institution cannot completely suppress. It is this relentless, organized, and aggressive behavior, the continuous defiance symbolized by the endless parade of hidden weapons, that leads to the final, necessary separation. When the prisoner repeatedly demonstrates that they are unwilling or unable to live within the fragile order of the general population, when their actions prove them to be an unceasing threat, the system delivers its most severe sentence. The response to illegal weapons, uprisings, and aggressive behavior is predictable and absolute. The man who wields the forbidden steel is destined for the isolation cell, a place where the chaos of the gang is replaced by the far colder, deeper silence of the supermax. This is the ultimate containment, designed not to destroy the man, but to shatter the network of control that he represents. The journey into this deeper confinement is the destination where the external threat of the shank is replaced by the profound internal terror of isolation. The consequence unfolds: a prison within a prison. When the laws of the house are broken, the punishment is exile. The sentence is paid not in years added to the calendar, but in the slow, grinding solitude of an isolation cell, a place feared more than the threat of a rival's knife. This journey begins with a final, heavy transaction. The prisoner is removed from the main line, from the general population, and transferred to the security housing unit. This structure is a prison within a prison, a place known simply by its chilling acronym, the SHU. It is the ultimate consequence, the absolute sanction reserved for those who have proven themselves to be relentlessly and profoundly dangerous. The concept of the super maximum security unit arose from the strategic necessity of managing the most intractable, disruptive, and often organized individuals. The goal is not merely to punish, but to surgically excise the command structure of the gangs that fuel the violence within the main prison body. The architects of this system understood that while walls contain, connection fuels the organized threat. Therefore, the SHU is designed to deny connection. To be sentenced to the SHU is to receive a non-specific, indefinite sentence of at least 2 years, a period of time measured not in seasons, but in the near total loss of sensory input and human contact. It is a period of pure time, dedicated to absolute isolation. The duration is not fixed at the outset. Rather, it is determined by the inmate's behavior within the isolation unit itself. A man must earn his way back to the general population through an exacting, lengthy process of demonstrating compliance and a complete severance of all gang ties. This journey to the SHU is the final, predictable outcome of a long history of misconduct. It is the punishment for possessing those forbidden instruments of steel, for orchestrating violence, for participating in organized uprisings, or for continuing to direct criminal activity from within the prison walls. The system operates on a principle of escalating necessity. When standard confinement fails to neutralize the threat, absolute isolation is deployed. The structure of the SHU stands geographically close to the main building, only 100 meters away. Yet the distance marks a catastrophic shift in the conditions of confinement. The cells of the general population, though sparse, offer a view of a small patch of sky. The SHU offers none of these. Its architecture is explicitly designed to maximize sensory deprivation and minimize the potential for communication. The SHU is a facility of white and grey concrete, often shaped like an X or a cross to optimize surveillance while minimizing the possibility of cross-cell contact. There are no traditional windows in the security housing unit. This lack of windows is a critical element of the design, ensuring that the inmate is denied the basic comfort of ambient light, the passage of clouds, or the sight of the life cycle unfolding outside the walls. Inside the unit, the cells themselves are placed so that visual contact between inmates is almost impossible. The inmates have only verbal access to one another, reduced to shouting conversations through the ventilation shafts or underneath the thick doors, a method of communication that is highly strained, easily monitored, and often futile. The intention is to remove all possibility of coordinated action. This absolute state of visual separation defines the experience of the SHU. An inmate can spend weeks, even months, without seeing another detainee face to face. The rare moments of visibility occur only when a man is being moved, shackled, and escorted. This isolation ensures that the leaders and the foot soldiers are all equally cut off. The perimeter of the SHU is guarded by measures that defy human breach. No one has ever successfully escaped from this high security unit. The outer perimeter is a complex system designed for deterrence and immediate fatality. If an inmate were to somehow breach the inner perimeter fence and attempt to touch the exterior boundary, they would encounter what is grimly referred to as the lethal fence. This system, which runs a high voltage through the wires, is engineered to be instantly fatal to anyone who makes contact. The authorities operate this boundary with a cold, fiscal rationale. The costs associated with running and maintaining this electrified terminal fence are far less than the cost associated with manning the perimeter towers with correctional officers. The fence is the silent, absolute guard, a fixed line that cannot be negotiated with, bribed, or overcome. It is the physical manifestation of the system's final word. The regime within the SHU is a dramatic change from the main line. Every routine is reduced to its barest, most controlled form. Meals are delivered directly through the slot. Movement requires a full escort. Solitude is the constant, unyielding state of being. The SHU is a world of constant, enforced peace, purchased at the profound price of human connection. The entire unit is designed to ensure one thing: that the chaos that defined the inmate's life outside the SHU cannot follow him in. The violence of the gang is replaced by the profound, deep silence of the stone cell. The struggle for physical dominance is supplanted by the struggle for psychological endurance. The sentence to the SHU is a slow, methodical test of the human spirit. The profound silence becomes the primary agent of change, forcing the mind inward, confronting the inmate with his own history, his own choices, and the long, empty prospect of time. This isolation cell is the ultimate confinement, the deliberate severing of all but the most basic human needs. The inmate is left with only his thoughts, his few authorized possessions, and the cold, smooth reality of the concrete around him. The consequence for a life of violence is a world of forced stillness. The architecture of the SHU, therefore, is not just a building. It is a philosophy rendered in concrete and steel. The men who are transferred here now enter a world defined by the absolute control of the environment. The lethal X-shape, a geometry designed to restrict 100 meters from the main building, stands a structure shaped like the mark of a curse, an X. It is here that architecture itself becomes the primary guard, designed not only to restrain, but to sever the very possibility of escape. The exterior of the Security Housing Unit, or SHU, is a study in brutalist simplicity, its walls a blank canvas of white and grey concrete. But its true genius lies in its geometric design. The unit is often configured in a cross or an X shape, an intensely practical solution to the persistent problem of communication and control. This geometry of control ensures that all corridors converge at a central, easily monitored point. The design minimizes the need for multiple guards to oversee vast stretches of hallway, concentrating surveillance and door control at the heart of the cross. More profoundly, the X shape maximizes separation. The long radial wings of the building are constructed so that each cell is a world unto itself, strategically positioned to prevent any visual connection between the occupants of the neighboring wing. The wings themselves are segmented, heavy steel doors separating one block from the next. This allows correctional officers to lock down one section entirely while maintaining limited movement in another, ensuring that any localized disturbance cannot easily spread. The system is designed to create a labyrinth of heavy doors operated by unseen hands. Within this fixed, engineered structure, the ultimate layer of security is delivered by the perimeter itself. The defense is absolute, relying on a sophisticated, non-human barrier that is both a guard and a final judge. This barrier is the lethal fence. It is not a decorative perimeter, but an active, terminal defense system. If an inmate were to somehow breach the formidable inner defenses of the housing unit and attempt to come in contact with this final, outer line, the consequence would be immediate and fatal. The fence is electrified, carrying a high voltage charge capable of instantaneous fatality. The maintenance and operation of this fence is executed with a cold, almost detached rationale. The costs associated with running and maintaining the electrified fence, its power consumption and necessary repairs, are calculated to be far less than the cost associated with constantly manning the perimeter towers with human correctional officers. The lethal fence is thus the ultimate, cost-effective guard, a tireless, unblinking sentinel of absolute authority. It is a fixed, non-negotiable law, rendered in copper wire and current. The architectural intent of the SHU is to strip the inmate of every connection to the outside world, save for the most basic necessities of life. This is most powerfully realized in the design of the cells themselves. The general population cells, though sparse, typically offer a small window. In the security housing unit, this connection is surgically severed. There are no windows in the SHU. The outer shell of the building is solid, thick concrete, a visual and sonic barrier that denies the inmate the basic comforts of nature and the passage of time. Without the sight of the sun rising or setting, the simple, reliable rhythm of the day is shattered. Time becomes abstract, defined only by the schedule of meals and the periodic unlocking of the door. This denial of light and external view is deliberate. It is an act of sensory deprivation intended to combat the inmate's ability to coordinate and communicate. By removing any visual reference point, the architecture ensures that communication remains difficult, strained, and nearly impossible to sustain over long distances. The inmate is reduced to operating in a world of limited verbal exchanges, often muffled and filtered through thick ventilation ducts. The design is engineered such that inmates have only verbal access to other prisoners. They never actually see a fellow inmate face to face, unless they are being escorted, fully shackled. The knowledge that a fellow inmate is only a thin concrete wall away, yet utterly unreachable and unseen, creates a profound psychological tension. It is the proximity of society paired with the absolute reality of solitude. When the unit is opened for observation, the stark reality of this geometry becomes clear. A long, sterile corridor stretches out, lined on one side by the solid, unmoving facades of the steel cell doors. The units are silent, save for the hum of the ventilation and the clank of the corridor control system. The movement of a single inmate is a slow, methodical ritual, watched by numerous officers. The entire system is a monument to the principle that absolute security is achieved through absolute separation. The X-shaped structure, the lethal fence, the denial of windows. Each element works in concert to maintain a constant, measured peace within the block. The violence of the outside world is replaced by the profound stillness of the inner one, forcing the inmate to grapple not with a rival's blade, but with the endless, echoing silence of his own mind. This geometry of control dictates every interaction, every routine, and every risk within the block. The corridor control. Never to see the other. Inside the maximum security block, a unique law holds sway. The prisoners never see each other. They move in silence, unseen, separated by the corridor control system, a labyrinth of heavy doors operated by unseen hands. The operational core of the Security Housing Unit, or SHU, is the principle of maximum distance and minimum visibility. While the external architecture controls the perimeter, the internal environment is managed by an intricate system of mechanical and human control designed to prevent the formation of any organized threat. The strategic goal is to neutralize the ability of the inmates to communicate, plan, or organize, achieved primarily through the control of movement and the meticulous separation of individuals. The SHU is not a single open space, but a series of interconnected, reinforced corridors and separate units. To move a detainee from one area to another requires the deliberate, synchronized opening and closing of multiple doors. This process is managed by the corridor control, a centralized system that governs access throughout the unit, turning the simple act of walking into a slow, choreographed ritual. Each unit within the SHU possesses a corridor control station, a point from which an officer can see the length of the hall and operate the automated heavy steel doors. The system ensures that no two inmates who are being moved can ever cross paths or even pause in a space where they might exchange more than a shout. The doors are solid, thick, and unforgiving, clanging shut with a sound that echoes the absolute finality of the confinement. The phrase, 12-block corridor please, is the operational language of this system, a constant, measured repetition that underscores the precision required. This rigid control over movement directly supports the architectural intent. The inmates have only verbal access to other inmates. The guards, in effect, act as filters, managing the visual input to ensure that the isolation is absolute. The world of the SHU is one of proximity without presence. Men know others are near, but their existence is reduced to muffled shouts through a duct or the distant sound of a door locking. The management of personnel within this environment is another critical component of control. In a typical prison setting, correctional officers on patrol often carry sidearms or batons. However, inside the maximum security corridors of the SHU, the strategy shifts. The guards are usually unarmed in order to avoid hostage situations. This decision is a calculated gamble, rooted in the understanding that an armed guard is a double-edged sword. While a firearm provides immediate force, it also becomes the ultimate prize for a desperate inmate. The potential for a sudden, high-stakes hostage crisis where the weapon is seized is a risk that the system seeks to neutralize entirely. The security of the unarmed officer relies entirely on the architecture and the team structure. The heavy doors, the controlled visibility, and the quick response capabilities of armed backup outside the immediate block are the true defenses. The physical structure, therefore, acts as the ultimate line of protection. The daily routine in the SHU is dictated by the maintenance of this non-contact rule. Every task, from the delivery of meals to the distribution of supplies, is conducted through the narrow slot in the cell door. This ensures that the officer never has to fully open the door, and the inmate never has full access to the corridor. The consequences of this prolonged isolation begin to manifest subtly but profoundly over time. the absence of natural light, and the constant filtered sound create a monotone sensory environment that is profoundly disruptive to the human mind. The guards themselves must operate under this constant tension. Their routine requires a detached professionalism, a constant awareness of the unseen dangers that exist just beyond the steel door. The environment of the SHU is, in essence, a living testament to the belief that the removal of social structure is the most effective form of control. The most dangerous men are rendered impotent not by physical force alone, but by the geometric and procedural barriers that prevent them from communicating. The individual, severed from the network that gave him power, is left with only the weight of his own existence. This absolute control over space and presence sets the stage for the next necessity of life: sustenance. In a world where every connection is denied, the simple act of receiving a meal becomes another ritual of control, a moment of acute vulnerability and enforced submission. The feeding of shadows, meals without utensils. At lunchtime in Block C12, the delivery of sustenance is a rapid-fire ritual of caution and control. There is no communal hall, no shared table, only the cell door slot and a 10-minute clock. The process of feeding the detainees within the Security Housing Unit, or SHU, is transformed from a simple necessity into a highly choreographed, high-risk security operation. There is no canteen, no gathering place. All meals are served directly into the individual cells, a transaction that underscores the absolute isolation of each man. The delivery is a testament to the meticulous, measured control required. The meals themselves are functional and designed for maximum security compliance. They are served on plastic plates, which cannot be broken or sharpened into weapons. Furthermore, the final layer of control over the inmate is revealed in the absence of basic implements. There is no cutlery. The prisoners are required to eat their entire meal with their bare hands, a practice that not only emphasizes their stripped-down primal state of existence, but also eliminates a critical source of contraband. The process of distributing these meals is executed with military efficiency. It takes just 2 prison guards approximately 10 minutes to feed all 50 detainees in a given block. This speed is a deliberate feature designed to minimize the time that officers are exposed to the immediate vicinity of the cell door slots, a zone of high risk. The level of danger presented by this particular population demands an additional, visible layer of security. The entire operation unfolds under the watchful eye of a third guard who is armed with a shotgun. This third officer does not handle the food. Their sole function is to provide armed, immediate overwatch for the 2 officers conducting the delivery, ready to respond instantly to any sign of trouble. The presence of the armed guard is a constant, stark reminder that the potential for violence is only a moment away. The extreme precautions taken during this routine are rooted in the established history of the population. They have proven over time that they cannot successfully come into a dining room with other inmates without there being trouble. The violence that defined their time in the general population makes any form of communal dining an unacceptable risk. The entire ritual of sustenance thus becomes a moment of enforced submission and acute vulnerability. The prisoner, confined within the small concrete room, must wait for the sound of the approaching cart, the clatter of the plastic tray, and the heavy presence of the armed guard. eating with bare hands further reduces the inmate to a stripped-down existence, underscoring their total dependence on the system for the most fundamental requirement of survival, the necessity of a shotgun to oversee. The distribution of plastic plates of food is the clearest possible articulation of the deep, pervasive fear that governs the SHU. Every action is a risk assessment, and every necessity is transformed into a procedure of absolute control. The absence of a shared meal also reinforces the psychological isolation. By denying this communal moment, the SHU further breaks down the potential for gang organization and communication. The inmate is not only visually and physically separated, but also socially isolated, forced to consume his sustenance in a quiet, individual vacuum. The 10-minute clock serves as a hard limit on the duration of this high-risk exposure. The guards are trained to execute the delivery quickly, minimizing the chance for a prisoner to orchestrate a disruptive action. The total control over the environment extends to every detail of the inmate's life. The next stage of this quiet history will delve into the final, desperate form of defiance waged by some of the population and the architectural response to behaviors that border on madness, the plexiglass veil, and the ultimate contempt. The descent into absolute isolation often provokes a raw, desperate response, a stripping away of civility that leaves only primal contempt. This breakdown demands a new, technological barrier, the plexiglass cell. Even within the security housing unit, where the inmate is already isolated and subject to total environmental control, there are levels of violence and defiance that demand additional measures. When the external forms of aggression are suppressed, the aggression often turns inward, or it manifests in a final, degrading form of contempt directed at the officers. The phenomenon of gassing. Gassing is the deliberate act of preparing and hurling bodily waste, fecal matter, urine, and other liquid substances through the small openings in the cell door, targeting the correctional officers. It is an act of profound, visceral aggression, psychological attack designed to degrade and assault the officer. The authorities acknowledge that this behavior is not uncommon inside the supermax. It is often a sign that some inmates, after years of this kind of detention, are bordering on madness. When a man is stripped of all conventional power, this form of biological and psychological warfare is sometimes the only final means of expressing defiance. The prison system's response to this specific, humiliating threat is the architectural adaptation of the cell itself. For a particular population of inmates within the SHU, those who have demonstrated a clear and persistent pattern of using liquid substances to assault officers, a new barrier is necessary: the plexiglass cell. The plexiglass cell fundamentally alters the interface between the inmate and the correctional officer. Instead of the standard opaque steel door, these specialty cells incorporate a thick, clear sheet of high-strength acrylic polymer, or plexiglass, over the front of the cell. This clear barrier serves several crucial functions. First, and most immediately, it prevents the deliberate projection of substances. The plexiglass acts as an absolute seal. Second, the clear barrier allows for continuous, high-visibility surveillance. The officers are able to see the inmate inside the cell without having to open the door, ensuring that the inmate's movements and behavior are constantly visible. The irony of the plexiglass veil is profound. Here, it is deployed as the ultimate tool of separation. It is a clear barrier that permits sight but denies all forms of physical connection, turning the inmate into a specimen under constant clinical observation. The psychological toll of this type of confinement is immense, and the gassing behavior is frequently a symptom of that erosion. Fernando Medina, a man sentenced to life for homicide, who has spent 17 years inside the Supermax, reflects on the psychological devastation. Has this confinement taken an effect on me? Am I damaged in some way? He speaks with quiet authority on the breakdown he has witnessed in others. The relentless solitude often leads to a profound break. He describes individuals who will simply snap psychologically, letting the time get to them. They refuse to participate in the program. They shut down. They will just sit there in their cell all day, looking at the walls, letting their mind run away with them. The plexiglass cell is a direct response to the most desperate, externalized manifestations of this internal decay. It is the architectural admission that the psychological pressure of the SHU is so immense that it compels some men to use their own bodies as the final, desperate weapon. The system cannot cure the madness, but it can contain the physical results of that madness. The officers who work in these plexiglass blocks must view the acts of gassing not as personal insults, but as predictable, clinical signs of psychological disintegration. The clear barrier is there to protect their health and their sanity from the deliberate contempt of the isolated. This extreme precaution is deemed necessary because, according to the authorities, all of the detainees held in the SHU have demonstrated through their past actions that they are highly volatile. The plexiglass is the quiet acknowledgement that the man inside is capable of the most extreme, degrading acts of defiance. The ultimate tragedy of the plexiglass cell is that it is both a safeguard for the staff and a final, physical symbol of the inmate's lost humanity. He is sealed away, not just by concrete, but by a transparent, unyielding membrane that permits no touch, no exchange, and no simple, unguarded moment of human recognition. The erosion of self. 17 years in the echoing room. Fernando Medina, a man whose crime earned him life, has spent nearly 2 decades navigating the interior landscape of his cell. His question, quietly delivered, is the only one that truly matters in this place. Am I damaged in some way? I don't know. The ultimate weapon of the Security Housing Unit, or SHU, is time itself. For men like Fernando Medina, sentenced to life for homicide, the isolation is a vast, ongoing process of psychological attrition. He has endured 17 years of this profound solitude, a span of time equivalent to an entire generation of the free world. Medina's physical state during the rare moments of interaction is telling. He is not only kept a good distance away, but he is also heavily chained. The metallic weight around his wrists and ankles, a constant reminder of the extreme caution the system must take. This physical restraint underscores the internal, psychological struggle he faces against the loss of the self. His reflection upon his own sanity is delivered with a quiet, unsettling clarity. He articulates the fundamental anxiety that haunts every inmate in prolonged isolation, the fear of erosion. He asks whether all these years being confined has taken an effect on him, whether he is damaged in some way. The chilling answer he offers is one of simple uncertainty. He does not know. The The self has become so internalized, so severed from external reference, that the prisoner can no longer assess the integrity of his own mind. Medina speaks not only for himself, but for the profound psychological decay he has witnessed in others. He describes two distinct paths to madness within the SHU, the break and the retreat. The first is the violent collapse, the moment when the mind snaps psychologically. This is the failure characterized by rage, sudden irrationality, and the inability to withstand the pressure of confinement any longer. These are the individuals who simply let the time get to them, their bottled up tension exploding into desperate acts of aggression. The second path, perhaps more tragic in its stillness, is the ultimate retreat into silence. He describes individuals who just shut down. They refuse to participate in the program. They withdraw completely, refusing to engage in conversation. They will just sit there in their cell all day, looking at the walls. They let their mind run away with them, lost in the boundless, unpoliced landscape of their own thoughts. The conditions of the SHU are tailor-made for this psychological attrition. The inmate is surrounded by solitude, silence, and only the guards to speak to. For many, this is the final, true reality of their sentence, a state that may endure for a lifetime. The lack of sensory stimulation and the denial of unmonitored human exchange all contribute to a predictable psychological decline. The constant battle in the SHU is the effort required to prevent this deterioration. Medina knows that if they let themselves deteriorate, that is what will happen to them. The choice to resist decay is an active, exhausting necessity. It requires an immense, sustained effort to impose self-discipline and to find structure where the environment provides none. The guards, who are the only human beings allowed into the inmate sphere of interaction, become figures of profound, yet deeply limited, connection. The exchange is rarely one of true human recognition. It is a transaction of command, compliance, and survival. The chilling reality of a man like Medina is that he has endured this profound psychological siege for nearly 2 decades. He is a survivor of profound sensory deprivation, a testament to the resilience of the mind, but a resilience that is constantly in question. Medina's testimony is a profound, quiet warning. The SHU is not a neutral space. It is a crucible that demands a relentless, active form of psychological warfare against the self. The only alternative is the descent into the silent, internal chaos of a mind that has surrendered to the blank walls. This profound, internal struggle requires a strategic response. The missing handshake, an exile's thirst for contact. Not all prisoners rage against the stone. Some learn to survive through stillness, like Eddie Mills, who, despite his violent past, is now considered well-behaved. His greatest loss, however, is not freedom, but the simple, forgotten dignity of human touch. The psychological warfare waged by the Security Housing Unit, or SHU, is universal, yet the strategies of resistance employed by the inmates are profoundly individual. While some succumb to rage, others, like Eddie Mills, find a path to survival through meticulous self-discipline and the pursuit of an internal, ordered life. Mills, convicted of violent hold-ups 7 times and currently serving a life sentence, represents the disciplined resistance to the chaos of isolation. Despite his history, a member of a neo-Nazi gang who once attacked a fellow inmate 11 years ago, Mills is considered a well-behaved prisoner. His compliance is a strategic move to navigate the long years of his sentence. His placement in solitary confinement is a direct result of that attack, a continuous sentence of 11 years defined by 23 hours a day, locked inside a cell with no windows. The profound emptiness of this existence forces the mind to focus on the things that are lost, the elemental truths of human connection that are systematically denied. In the rare moments when he is allowed close enough for an interview, Mills speaks with a quiet, almost mournful clarity about his greatest deprivation. He states simply that he thinks the biggest thing they probably all miss is just the human contact. This yearning is not for grand freedoms, but for the fundamental dignities of social existence. He speaks of being around and joking, playing and shaking hands. The simple act of shaking a hand is a profound casualty of his isolation. The dimensions of this existence make the smallest, most routine actions monumental efforts of will. Mills's survival in the SHU requires the absolute opposite of his past. A state of forced stillness, meticulous planning, and the creation of an internal world that is rigorously ordered and profoundly calm. The struggle for men like Mills is to prevent the silent, internal chaos. The defense against this chaos is structure, rhythm, and the profound, sustained commitment to the development of the self. The silence of the cell is instead repurposed by Mills as a field of study, a vast and uninterrupted space for intellectual discipline. His regimen is an act of war against the erosion of the mind. He has spent years in the quiet pursuit of knowledge, a self-imposed curriculum of linguistics and law. He has been teaching himself Spanish and French, languages that require the difficult, meticulous work of memorizing grammar and vocabulary. This practice imposes an external order upon the formless chaos of his isolated existence. His latest intellectual project is the deep immersion in business law. This choice is particularly revealing as it forces him to grapple with the complex, rigorous structures of the outside world, a world of legal logic that stands in stark opposition to the brutal rules of the gang life that he once led. The simple, profound need for human contact becomes the underlying emotional engine for this intellectual work. The study is a way to maintain the structural integrity of the self. His discipline transforms the cell from a place of simple containment into a laboratory of the self, forging an internal world that is richer, more complex, and more rigorously controlled than the environment that contains him. The journey of Eddie Mills is a quiet, powerful testament to the resilience of the human mind. He has taken the silence of the supermax and transformed it into a space of intense, solitary learning. The fight is not yet over, but the terms have changed. The weapon is no longer the forbidden shank, but the slow, measured pace of a mind determined to learn, to grow, and to remember the world that exists beyond the steel door. The discipline of dawn, studying against the shadow. When the world outside offers no stimulation, the mind must create its own field of battle. Eddie Mills, locked away 23 hours a day, wages his war not with shanks, but with language and law, rising before the sun to discipline the hours. The profound emptiness of the isolation cell is met by Eddie Mills with a meticulous, self-imposed structure. His day is defined by the relentless, quiet rhythm of his own intellectual program. This is the discipline of dawn, a deliberate act of self-management, where the hours are bent toward the pursuit of knowledge. Mills has spent 11 years in this state of continuous solitary confinement. The knowledge that his sentence is for life forces him into a state of profound self-reliance. His schedule reveals the commitment required to prevent psychological collapse. His day begins not with the sound of the guard's shift change, but in the deepest, quietest part of the night. He makes a conscious choice to manipulate the hours of darkness. He goes to bed at about 9 o'clock in the evening. He then rises at about 4 o'clock in the morning, long before the scheduled start of the prison day. This early rising is a strategic act of mental dominance. He claims the morning hours for study, a time when the block is at its most still and his mind is at its most receptive. This is the period dedicated to the rigorous, unglamorous work of memorization and comprehension. His early intellectual endeavors included the study of Spanish and French. This practice imposes an external order upon the formless chaos of his isolated existence. His latest intellectual project is the deep immersion into business law. This choice forces him to grapple with the complex, rigorous structures of the outside world, a world of legal logic that stands in stark opposition to the brutal rules of the gang life he once led. The time dedicated to this mental labor is substantial and deeply disciplined. Between reading and actually studying, he spends roughly 8 to 10, sometimes 15 hours a day, studying. This is a work schedule that rivals the dedication of a student pursuing a doctoral degree, carried out under the most extreme conditions. This intense, prolonged intellectual labor is the foundation of his survival strategy. It is the active rejection of the descent into madness. The mind, perpetually occupied with external rules and complex information, is denied the opportunity to turn inward and consume itself. His regimen includes a necessary commitment to physical conditioning as well. He usually works out after breakfast, using the limited space of his cell to perform rigorous exercises. This is a critical pairing. The intellectual discipline of the law is balanced by the physical discipline of the body. The routine creates a predictable, self-imposed rhythm that is essential for psychological stability. The hours are no longer measured by the slow, painful tick of the external clock, but by the progress through a legal textbook. He becomes the master of his own internal time. The guards who observe Mills acknowledge the profound nature of this discipline. His continuous, non-aggressive engagement with his studies is what contributes to his status as a well-behaved prisoner. The simple, powerful message delivered through this regimen is one of self-possession. The system can take his freedom, but it cannot take the territory of his mind, so long as he continues to occupy it with structure and rigor. The long hours of study are simply a preparation for the next stage of endurance, the journey to the concrete hole where the intellectual struggle is briefly replaced by the sheer physical reality of the chain. The hour of the concrete hole. For a single hour a day, the automated door grants a limited reprieve. This is the walkyard, a confined concrete box, a space that is both a brief release from the cell and, as Eddie himself notes, almost the same thing as a cell without books or without television. The long, internalized struggle of Eddie Mills' study regimen is punctuated by a single, rationed hour of external movement. The door to Eddie's cell opens automatically, a cold mechanical command that signals the brief daily window of freedom. The walkyard is a confined concrete hole, barely 5 meters wide and 3 meters long, surrounded by high blank walls and topped with wire mesh. This small space is the inmate's only glimpse of the open sky. For a man who rises before the sun and studies through the morning, the light and air are a stark, vital contrast to the filtered atmosphere of his cell. The sky, vast and indifferent, becomes the single most potent symbol of the world he is denied. Yet even this brief reprieve is delivered under a heavy shadow of control and irony. The guards supervise the movement and allow the rare moments of filming only so long as Eddie is securely shackled. The iron around his ankles and wrists is the indelible mark of his status. Eddie speaks with a chilling clarity about this paradox. He notes that sometimes he doesn't even come out, doesn't even bother coming out, because it's almost the same thing as a cell without books, or without television, or without anything. The walkyard, though physically separate, often fails to provide true sensory relief. Whether he chooses to take the hour depends on the mood. Sometimes, he admits, it's good to come out here just to get away from the cell. A slight change of environment for a moment. The movement to the yard also allows for the single, carefully managed moment where Eddie might see fellow inmates. This is the only time of the day where his isolation is momentarily broken. For Eddie, the hour in the walkyard is often dedicated to a vigorous exercise routine, a commitment common among many detainees. Physical exertion is essential to prevent the atrophy of the body and to manage the immense psychological stress. This physical discipline mirrors his intellectual discipline. During the rare interview, the formality of the confinement is starkly visible. He is asked to confirm his understanding of the rules, being handcuffed while answering this interview. His reply is calm and measured, accepting the constraint as a predictable, necessary function of the system he defied. He maintains that he poses no threat to any of the officers, yet he immediately offers the institutional justification for the chains. The hour in the walkyard is not an hour of freedom. It is an hour of supervised transaction, a physical necessity delivered under the constant reminder of his dangerous past. The simple, physical act of stretching his legs and seeing the sky is inextricably tied to the metallic weight of the chains and the watchful, unforgiving eye of the surveillance system. The importance of this hour, however compromised, is its necessity for the mind's endurance. It is the short pause that allows the disciplined study to continue. The body moves, the lungs take in air, and the eyes register the indifferent vastness of the sky, preparing the individual for the long internal silence that follows. But the moment the automated door closes behind him, the system performs a final, critical act of control. The long hours of compliance and study do not exempt the prisoner from the pervasive, silent suspicion that governs the SHU. Even as he exercises under the open sky, unseen hands are entering his cell, searching the deep interior of his private space for the smallest sign of defiance or the quiet, hidden tools of rebellion. The vigilance is total, and it is unceasing. The weight of the chain, acknowledging past deeds. The iron around his wrists is a testament not to the man he is today, but to the indelible shadow of his past actions. In this moment of guarded exchange, Eddie offers a chilling clarity about the system and his own history. The rare conversation permitted with a detainee in the Security Housing Unit, or SHU, is a meticulously managed negotiation between external documentation and uncompromising internal security. The presence of the chain, even during a conversation, is the system's way of speaking volumes without uttering a word. When asked about the necessity of his restraints, Eddie's response is delivered with a calm, disarming logic. He acknowledges the system's justification, stating that he can see where they would take the precaution to make sure that he doesn't pose a threat. This acceptance is a strategic recognition that the present moment is less important than the historical shadow he casts. His past actions, the violent hold-ups, the neo-Nazi affiliation, and the definitive act of attacking a fellow inmate 11 years ago are the unchangeable variables in the system's equation. The precaution is taken not only against the staff, but against the possibility of an impulsive, sudden act of aggression directed against other inmates or convicts or things of those in nature. The chains are a mechanism to ensure the stability of the entire SHU ecosystem. This moment of self-reflection is a point of dignity within submission. Eddie Mills does not deny his history. He quietly confirms the severity of his past choices, validating the extreme measures of the Supermax. This internal reckoning is a stark contrast to the common resistance found in the general population. The maintenance of the body is another facet of this determined self-control. Eddie goes through a vigorous exercise routine each day in the walk yard. This physical discipline is a vital psychological tool to manage the immense psychological stress. The well-defined, strong body, combined with a history of violence, necessitates constant physical restraint. The chains are the fixed reality, the simple, undeniable evidence that the system's memory is longer and less forgiving than the prisoner's capacity for change. The entire environment of the SHU forces the inmate to live in a state of hyper-awareness regarding cause and consequence. The self-imposed discipline of the 8 to 15 hours a day of study is Eddie's attempt to create a favorable record, to demonstrate a profound, sustained commitment to non-violence that may, one day, earn him a return to the general population. His compliance, his clarity, and his sustained regimen are all part of a long-term strategy for survival. He is attempting to prove, through years of documentation, that the man the system fears is no longer the man in the cell. The chains, however, remain the final, physical argument against his claim. The constant need for vigilance requires a final, critical invasion of the inmate's privacy. The moment Eddie Mills is escorted back from the walk yard, the hidden guardians enter his cell. The search is not for a large weapon, but for the infinitesimal, the hidden tools of self-expression and forbidden knowledge that represent the final, desperate acts of the contained mind. The feather, the needle, contraband of the soul. While Eddie is in the yard, the unseen guardians enter his room, searching not for steel, but for the signs of hidden artistic rebellion. What seems to the civilian mind as trivial here becomes a matter of life and loss of life. The feather, the return of the inmate from the walk yard, signals the commencement of the cell search. This operation is performed while the cell is empty. The guards are seeking the infinitesimal, the hidden tokens, the illicit materials, and the ingenious tools of self-expression that represent a quiet, persistent defiance. The cell of Eddie Mills, though clean, is subject to this intense scrutiny. His quiet rebellion is manifested in artwork. a forbidden craft requiring banned materials. The typical SHU cell is sparse, containing only a few permitted items: a clear-case television, a limited number of pens, and a small stack of books. Yet, Eddie Mills has managed to produce paintings. The tools of his art are relics of necessity. An officer observes that Mills seems to be using milk cartons and small pieces of thread to create a paintbrush. His colors are not industrial pigments, but derived from the meager rations provided through the food slot. The search soon uncovers an item that immediately escalates the situation: a feather. The feather is a small, soft, organic piece of the outside world. The officer views the feather not as a simple curiosity, but as a potential weapon, a tool of silent biological warfare. It is considered contraband, and the officer confirms the immediate necessity of taking it. The explanation for this extreme caution is rooted in the brutal, high-risk reality of the supermax. The officer articulates the danger with a cold, clinical precision. So silly as it sounds to the people that don't have a very keen understanding of the prison setting. Something as simple as that feather, being as sharp as it is, could in a sense act as a dart tip for something flying through the cell and actually penetrate the skin. The feather's potential as a projectile is only the first layer of the threat. The deeper, more insidious danger is biological. The officer explains the chilling scenario: that feather can be dipped in human secretion, a reference to the gassing behavior, and darted out that hole in the door, striking an officer or a fellow inmate. The paramount concern is the state of the population's health. The officer provides a shocking statistic that drives this fear. 85% of the inmates in this institution are hepatitis C positive. The risk calculation is clear and immediate. An officer who is struck by a dart contaminated with human secretion faces the very real possibility of contracting a life-altering chronic disease. The officer's concern is personal and familial. He states with sober authority, "Now I don't want to have to go home and have to get hit with human secretion by this and worry about my family and me having hepatitis C." The feather is transformed into a potential biological weapon, a lethal needle carrying the invisible, silent threat of a chronic illness. The search for the infinitesimal is not paranoia. It is a necessary, calculated defense against a very real and pervasive danger. The discovery of the feather and the subsequent confiscation underscore the total, unwavering vigilance required to maintain the order of the SHU. Every small object is scrutinized for its potential to be weaponized. The system cannot afford to treat any anomaly as simple happenstance. The cell search confirms that even the quietest, most disciplined inmates maintain a continuous, hidden front of resistance. The system, however, will always deny this private space. The ultimate fate of Eddie Mills, despite his years of rigorous study and careful behavior, remains fixed within this absolute system of control. His current struggle is now measured by the smallest of increments, the hope for a slightly less isolated existence. The quiet millions of the shadow Eddie Mills, like an estimated 25,000 maximum security inmates across the United States, lives bound by the faint, distant promise of a change in fate. His best hope is not release to the free world, but a promotion to a slightly less rigid form of confinement. The quiet history of the Security Housing Unit, or SHU, is the history of a single man's long internal struggle against total isolation. but it is also the history of a vast, unacknowledged system of confinement. Across the United States, an estimated 25,000 maximum security inmates are detained in similar conditions. This silent architecture of isolation is a national reality. The scale of this operation underscores the profound commitment of the state to the philosophy of containment. These are long-term solutions designed to neutralize the organizing power of prison gangs and remove individuals deemed to be an unceasing, intolerable threat. For Eddie Mills, his years of study, his physical discipline, and his measured compliance are all directed toward one single, distant goal. His final fate is almost certainly fixed. He is unlikely to ever leave Pelican Bay prison. The free world is a permanent impossibility. Therefore, the definition of hope must be drastically altered. The grand, external goal of freedom is replaced by the small, internal objective of transfer. The best he can hope for is to be returned to a normal prison regime, a change of status that represents a profound promotion, a return to a world with a window, with limited contact, and with a small measure of communal life. This return to the general population is not an automatic right. It is a meticulously monitored reward. The change in status is entirely dependent on his behavior within the SHU. He must demonstrate, through years of consistent non-aggression and the abandonment of all gang affiliations, that the threat he once posed has been completely neutralized. The concept of a normal prison regime becomes, for the man in the SHU, a mythical reward, a return to a less profound state of solitude, a break from the relentless, echoing silence of the SHU cell. The total commitment of the state to this philosophy is profound. The system operates on the premise that safety must be purchased at the cost of profound psychological deprivation. For men like Mills, the daily battle against the smooth, blank wall, the years of study in French and business law, and the physical discipline of the concrete hole are all acts of profound, sustained endurance. They are attempts to prove that they are worthy of the single, limited hope, a slight increase in human contact. The long, quiet hours of the SHU cell are the final, predictable consequence of a life spent breaking the fundamental rules of society. The silence that fills the cell is the sound of a system that has decided to remove the individual entirely from the social equation, leaving him with only the weight of his own existence and the faint, distant promise of a change in regime. The history of the Supermax is a history of necessary absolutes, absolute control, absolute security, and absolute isolation. The men within these walls, defined by their capacity for violence, are contained by an architecture that seeks to impose a permanent, profound stillness. And so, the quiet history of the Citadel ends where it began, with a man in a small concrete room, separated by a thin wall from 25,000 others, his life measured out by the slow, deliberate turning of time. The iron around his wrists is a testament to his past, but the book in his hand is a testament to the small, enduring hope that one day he might simply walk to a different door. The silence of the unheard prayer. Mental health in the windowless room. For men driven to the very brink of psychological endurance, the only lifeline offered is a brief, periodic visit with an unseen physician, an encounter mediated by the same steel and concrete that caused the illness. The system must address the madness it creates, the most profound, irreversible consequence of the security housing unit's SHU's structure is the predictable toll it takes on the human mind. Psychological damage inflicted by prolonged isolation is specific and devastating, often manifesting as a suite of symptoms that the general population seldom experiences. This is the pathology of silence, a crisis of the self, born from absolute sensory deprivation. This pathology grows slowly, insidiously, over the months and years, mirroring the ancient process of erosion where rock is turned to sand by unceasing, subtle forces. The SHU is not merely a physical prison. It is an engineered psychological environment designed to deny the mind its most fundamental needs: novelty, community, and the reliable flow of external stimuli. When the mind is starved in this way, it begins to turn inward, consuming its own reserves of rationality and structure. The primary psychological illnesses observed in this environment are chronic and challenging: deep paranoia and hypervigilance, where every sound is translated into a potential threat; auditory and visual hallucinations, born from the lack of external stimuli; and severe dissociation, where the inmate loses a cohesive sense of their own identity and the reliable passage of time. These symptoms are not merely emotional distress. They are structural breakdowns in the mind's operating system, directly proportional to the number of years spent staring at the smooth concrete walls. The inmate, lacking a window or natural light, loses the external anchors that synchronize the biological clock, leading to profound sleep disorders and a persistent state of low-grade delirium that blurs the line between waking and dreaming. The chilling irony is that the system is forced to treat the madness it creates. The necessity of providing mental health care in the SHU arose not from internal compassion, but from years of intense legal challenges and court oversight. These challenges forced correctional authorities to acknowledge the unconstitutional nature of housing the severely mentally ill in conditions of extreme isolation, recognizing that for certain individuals, the SHU was a form of active psychological torture. This oversight mandated the provision of specialized care, yet the very setting renders that care almost fundamentally impossible. The psychiatric evaluation of an SHU inmate is a grim, periodic ritual. It is never a simple, unguarded exchange. The interview is conducted through the cell door, often through the food slot, or mediated by a thick layer of mesh or plexiglass. The physician, or more often, the psychiatric technician, is tasked with assessing the patient's grip on reality, yet does so while maintaining a profound physical and emotional distance. This constant barrier makes the simplest act of establishing human rapport nearly impossible. The diagnostic tools rely entirely on verbal accounts, filtered by the prisoner's own deep-seated paranoia and the system's inherent distrust. The clinician hears a voice, but they rarely see a human being fully at ease, compounding the difficulty of accurate diagnosis. The medical personnel thus become figures of deep, inherent conflict for the inmate. They represent both the possibility of healing and the unyielding authority of the institution. An inmate's willingness to reveal his hallucinations or self-harm thoughts is always tempered by the calculated fear that this information can be used to control his classification and placement, potentially leading to further, more restrictive isolation. Honesty becomes a risk. Silence, however painful, remains the safer strategy. The treatment available within the confines of the SHU is tragically limited by the very architecture that defines it. Psychotherapy, the simple act of talking, is hampered by the lack of physical presence, the ambient noise of the block, and the constant risk that any conversation could be overheard. While medications can be administered to suppress the immediate symptoms, antidepressants, antipsychotics, and mood stabilizers, they cannot cure the root cause. The SHU is the disease. Therefore, the treatment must be administered within the confines of the condition itself. The cold, hard fact remains that the only true remedy for the pathology of silence is the cessation of the silence, a release that the security classification forbids. The most severe cases of psychological collapse are eventually removed from the SHU and placed into specialized mental health facilities within the prison system. But this transfer is slow, bureaucratic, and often difficult to achieve. For many, the mental health appointment remains the only human interaction outside the routine of the guards, a brief, cold transaction that acknowledges the existence of the inner turmoil but offers only provisional, temporary relief. The man remains separated by the wall, and the silence of the cell absorbs the unheard prayer for sanity. The pathology endures year after year until the mind itself becomes as fixed and rigid as the concrete that contains it. This process of psychological attrition is the hidden cost of the supermax. The system achieves external peace by exporting the chaos inward into the skull of the inmate. The slow disintegration of a man's sanity is a constant, ambient noise in the corridors of the SHU, a silent, pervasive testament to the limits of human endurance. The final form of defense for many inmates is a desperate internal retreat, a form of self-imposed psychological protective custody. They cease communicating with the guards about their mental state. They avoid the psychiatric visits, and they intentionally cultivate a bland, unthreatening persona designed to be ignored. This is the man who chooses to shut down, as described by Fernando Medina, letting his mind run away with him in a place where no one, not even the physician, can see the full extent of the collapse. They find a kind of dark freedom in the very invisibility that the system imposes upon them. The knowledge that this is happening on a massive scale, to men who study law and men who simply stare at the walls, haunts the entire institution. It is a fundamental conflict between the principle of absolute security and the basic requirements of the human brain. The SHU, designed to contain the chaotic violence of the body, ultimately faces its own defeat in the chaotic silence of the mind. The deep psychological cost drives the inmate toward the single, viable path of redemption. It requires more than compliance. It requires the final, profound act of cutting the last thread of connection to the outside gang world. An act that is more dangerous than any sentence in the SHU itself. The last legacy of the gang, renouncing the blood oath. The one absolute key to transfer lies in a single act of defiance, the formal renunciation of a blood oath sworn years ago. This process of debriefing is the only path to a slightly less silent existence, but it carries a sentence of being eliminated if the inmate is ever seen by his former brethren. For the inmate who has successfully endured years of the SHU's silent siege, who has mastered his mind through rigorous study and compliance, the final hurdle is not architectural or physical, it is existential. The long sentence of isolation is conditional. The final path out of the windowless room requires the prisoner to formally reject his past, an act known within the correctional system as debriefing. This transaction is the ultimate cold-blooded exchange, a slightly better life in prison for a lifetime of mortal danger. Debriefing is a meticulous, highly secured interrogation conducted not by classification officers, but by the intelligence and security unit staff. The process is not casual. It is a profound, structured inquiry that demands the inmate to completely renounce his loyalty to his former gang. This renunciation is not merely verbal. It requires the inmate to provide substantial, verifiable intelligence on the gang's command structure, its illicit activities, and its internal laws. The inmate must demonstrate beyond any reasonable doubt that he has fully and irreversibly defected. He must become an instrument of the state's security apparatus against the organization that once claimed his lifelong fealty. The sheer psychological weight of this demand cannot be overstated. The blood oath sworn years ago, often a pledge of loyalty taken in blood that supersedes all other bonds, including family, is a sacred contract within the subculture of the prison gangs. To renounce this oath, to become an informant, is to perform the deepest possible betrayal. The prisoner trades the isolation of the concrete cell for the certainty of becoming a target. The process of debriefing can take months, often involving multiple sessions where the inmate is probed and tested for honesty. The intelligence gathered must be corroborated and deemed sufficient to cripple the gang's operations or provide new insight into the movements of its leadership. If the debriefing is deemed insufficient, or if the inmate is suspected of withholding information, the process is terminated, and he is sent back to the SHU to continue his indefinite isolation. The system demands total, uncompromising surrender of the past. The state, through the intelligence unit, records every piece of information provided, creating an exhaustive file on the individual's history within the gang. This file, detailing the hierarchy, the symbols, the internal language, and the methods of communication, is the formal documentation of his betrayal. The information is then quietly disseminated throughout the state and federal prison systems, serving as an unseen, permanent warning to the gang that this individual is a marked enemy. The inmate, during this period, lives in a state of extreme psychological flux. He is torn between the deep, ingrained loyalty and fear of his former organization, and the intense, singular desire to escape the slow-motion psychological ruin of the SHU. The act of speaking the forbidden names, of revealing the sacred rituals, is a tearing of the self, an admission that the identity he built over decades was false and must be publicly sacrificed for survival. The consequence of this betrayal is profound. The moment the debriefing is complete, the individual becomes a ghost. His life is defined by the absolute necessity of maintaining his new, fragile status. He has earned his way out of the profound silence, but he has earned his way onto a permanent hit list. The blood oath, once broken, demands the only form of retribution the gang recognizes: the elimination of the traitor. The consequences of this betrayal necessitate a final relocation. The inmate, having earned his way out of the SHU, is transferred out of the maximum security isolation unit. However, he does not return to the mainline general population, where his demise will be instantaneous and guaranteed. Instead, he enters a separate status known as protective custody, or PC. Protective custody is the system's compromise. It is a status that formally acknowledges the profound, life-threatening danger the inmate now faces. PC means the inmate is still isolated from the overwhelming majority of the prison population, but the conditions are often slightly less restrictive than the extreme sensory deprivation of the SHU. He may share a small cell with another PC inmate of similar low-threat status. He may have slightly longer recreational hours, and the cells may even possess a window, allowing a view of the outside world. But this PC status is not freedom. It is merely a lateral move into a different kind of confinement. The inmate now lives in a separate yard, populated exclusively by other dropouts, former gang members who have similarly betrayed their oaths, or those facing other profound threats, such as those convicted of offenses of a sensitive nature. This population is inherently unstable, defined by mutual distrust and underlying psychological trauma. The day of transfer from the SHU to the PC unit is a slow, methodical exercise in security. The inmate is moved under heavy guard, often hooded and restrained, to ensure that no member of the general population can identify him as a known dropout, a sight that would instantly seal his fate. The new PC unit is a fortress within a fortress, designed to prevent the infiltration of the mainline gang members who would carry out the sentence. The physical environment of the PC unit, while offering more stimuli than the SHU, is permeated by a unique atmosphere of perpetual low-grade tension. The inmates in the PC unit often live in a permanent state of hypervigilance, knowing that the smallest breach of security, a careless officer, a corrupted maintenance worker, or a mistake in transfer protocol could lead to their elimination. Conversations in the PC yard are hushed, filtered by years of self-preservation and the profound knowledge of past betrayals. The emotional burden of PC life is immense. The individual must reconcile the clarity of mind gained in the SHU with the constant fear that now defines his existence. The fear of the concrete wall is replaced by the fear of the unseen knife. The inmate must constantly police his own behavior, knowing that any perceived vulnerability or weakness could be exploited by others in the PC population seeking favor with the mainline gangs. The system ensures that the information provided during the debriefing, the exact details of his betrayal, will follow him for the rest of his incarcerated life. The transfer out of the SHU is the ultimate paradox. The inmate has earned his way out of the profound silence, but he has earned his way onto a permanent hit list. The long-term sentence of the SHU, the psychological attrition, is traded for the perpetual, constant fear of physical assault. The certainty of the concrete wall is replaced by the constant uncertainty of a target on one's back. He must now assume that every former friend, every shared glance, and every whisper overheard in a communal area is a potential prelude to violence. The classification officers will continually review the PC inmate status, but the threat never truly diminishes. For the man who betrayed the blood oath, true safety remains a permanent impossibility. He is forever exiled, exiled from the free world, exiled from the general population, and exiled from the loyalty that once defined him. The walls of the maximum security prison are replaced by the invisible, unyielding walls of his own necessary vigilance. The last legacy of the gang is a lifetime sentence of of looking over his shoulder, a profound reminder that some oaths, once taken, can never be truly broken, even by the highest authority of the state. The transfer out of the SHU does not equal safety. It simply exchanges the specific terror of absolute isolation for the diffuse, continuous terror of absolute exposure. The man who chooses to live must now choose to live in fear, his only solace the slight, precious light that may now fall upon his face through a window. The economics of isolation. Even in a place designed to eliminate commerce and profit, the need for trade is fundamental. The men of the SHU conduct a silent, complex economy, where the smallest comforts, a stamped letter, a piece of paper, a candy bar, become currency of immense, desperate value. The SHU, with its policy of absolute isolation and total material control, is intended to be an economic void. Yet, human nature abhors a vacuum, and the need for trade, for comfort, for information, and for status will always persist. Within the unyielding geometry of the concrete corridor, a silent, complex black market thrives, the ghost market. This economy operates on the principles of extreme scarcity and profound desire, where the value of a commodity is measured not in dollars, but in the relief it offers from sensory deprivation. The currency of the ghost market is not coin or paper money, both of which are strictly forbidden. It consists of the smallest, most easily concealable comforts allowed by the system. The most stable and common form of currency is the postage stamp, a single stamped envelope which allows a prisoner to communicate a single thread of thought to the outside world, holds immense power. Stamps are easily traded and are used to pay for favors, small quantities of tobacco, or access to scarce resources. Other valuable commodities include single sheets of writing paper, extra pencils or pen refills, and the occasional small, high-sugar candy bar, items that provide a burst of fleeting, forbidden sensory pleasure. The mechanics of this trade are a testament to inmate ingenuity and defiance of the non-contact rule. Since direct physical contact is impossible, the trade relies on the kite system. This involves meticulously rolling the currency, stamps, tobacco, or messages into tiny waterproof cylinders, which are then attached to a long, thin string, often made of thread pulled from uniforms or elastic from underwear. This kite is then manipulated through the narrow spaces beneath the cell door or through the ventilation system. The most daring method involves timing the trade with the flushing of a toilet, relying on the brief water flow to carry a sealed item through the plumbing system to a designated cell further down the block. This practice is dangerous, requiring precise timing and risking a catastrophic mess and discovery. But it is the fastest way to traverse the distance of the block. The economy is governed by two forces, scarcity and necessity. Because food is standardized, a favorite item from a commissary order or a specific flavor of instant coffee becomes a luxury item commanding an exorbitant price in stamps. This illicit market not only provides comforts, but also sustains the remnants of the gang structure. Contraband creation, the manufacture of shanks from salvaged materials, or the brewing of crude homemade liquor from fermented fruit or bread, is itself a major economic sector. The inmate who successfully manufactures and sells a weapon is not only providing protection, but is also establishing his continued relevance and authority within the shadow economy, directly contradicting the SHU's mission to neutralize his power. The gang leader, even in isolation, can use smuggled messages, kites, and currency, stamps, to organize extortion, enforce loyalty, and maintain his grip on the flow of illicit goods. The existence of the ghost market demonstrates that the SHU, for all its architectural rigidity, fails to truly break the fundamental human need for community and commerce. It merely forces that commerce into the darkest, most minute channels, turning the smallest object into a prize of immense, desperate value. The silent corridor may not echo with shouting, but it hums with the invisible, continuous transactions of the black market. The unseen watch, surveillance in the digital silence. The isolation is never truly solitary. While the inmate is denied human contact, he is under the constant, unblinking gaze of a technological network where hidden cameras and ambient sound monitors act as the final, tireless guards of the windowless room. The core reality of the security housing unit is that while the prisoner is profoundly isolated from other inmates, he is never, for a single moment, truly alone. The silent, empty space of the concrete cell is, in fact, the most highly monitored environment in the entire facility. This is the truth of the unseen watch, a comprehensive technological network that serves as the final, absolute layer of control, a network that never sleeps and never blinks. The SHU is an environment where technology acts as the ultimate, tireless guard, a constant presence that transcends the limitations of human vigilance. Hidden cameras are placed in subtle, strategic locations, often concealed within vents, light fixtures, or even small pinhole apertures in the solid walls. These cameras provide continuous, high-definition visual coverage of the inmate's entire cell, allowing security personnel in the control booth to monitor behavior, mood, and any attempt at structural compromise or self-harm. Complementing the visual surveillance is the auditory network. Parabolic microphones and sophisticated ambient sound monitors are engineered to capture conversation or abnormal noises emanating from the cells. While the thick walls prevent open conversation between inmates, these specialized listening devices can pick up low whispers directed into the ventilation shafts or underneath the doors. This auditory vigilance is critical for catching communication between gang leaders or detecting the telltale scraping sounds of weapon manufacturing. The entire unit is coordinated by the corridor control system, which is not managed by human hands inside the block, but through centralized, remote-controlled mechanics. The remote operation of the heavy steel doors, the lighting systems, and the intercoms ensures that the human officer is kept physically separate from the inmate during routine operations. This use of technology is a direct tactical response to the hostage crises and attacks that plagued older prisons. The ultimate contrast in the SHU is between the human element and the technological element. The human guard, despite their training, requires breaks, is susceptible to corruption, and can suffer from fatigue, the very conditions that lead to lapses in security. The technological guard, however, is absolute. The camera never sleeps, the microphone never rests, the door mechanism never hesitates. This digital vigilance is permanent and unwavering. The inmate, knowing he is under this constant, invisible gaze, must police his own behavior not only when the guards are present, but for every minute of the 24-hour cycle. He must be careful how he moves, what he whispers into the darkness, and how he utilizes the small private space of his cell. The absolute isolation is paired with absolute observation, making the SHU a chilling laboratory of behavior modification. In a sense, the SHU, with its constant, invisible surveillance, acts as a chilling, magnified reflection of the growing surveillance in the outside world. The profound loss of privacy experienced by the inmate in the windowless room is simply the most extreme expression of a trend toward continuous monitoring and data collection that now defines modern life. The quiet of the cell may be the digital silence of total surveillance, ensuring that the last, deepest thoughts of the inmate are not truly his own. This network ensures that the chaos of the body remains contained, forever watched by the unblinking technological eye. The cycle is complete. The heavy door has clanged shut for the final time on the quiet geometry of the citadel, and the echo of its closing settles into the profound stillness of the night. We leave behind the vast, echoing canyons of concrete and steel, the unseen men who dwell within, and the ceaseless internal battle waged by the human mind against the tyranny of time and isolation. The stories we have explored, the paradox of the ancient sequoia grove, the terrifying simplicity of the forbidden steel, the slow erosion of the self behind the plexiglass veil, and the simple, monumental hope for a return to a normal prison regime. These are not tales of mythic heroes or vengeful gods. They are the fixed, modern tragedies of the human spirit, enacted in the deepest shadows of our own society. For 2,000 years, the poets of the ancient world whispered of Tartarus, a dark abyss deeper than the sea, where those who defied the cosmic order were bound by adamantine chains. They spoke of Sisyphus, cursed to push his stone without end, and Tantalus, forever parched beside unreachable water. These were the mythological punishments, the allegorical consequences of hubris and crime. Yet, in our modern world, we have constructed a place where these ancient metaphors become literal, predictable realities. The SHU is the contemporary Tartarus, not of prophecy, but of bureaucratic design. Here, the absence of sensation and the denial of human touch impose a punishment more subtle and perhaps more devastating than any physical chain. The man who studies law to fend off the silence is engaged in a Sisyphean labor of the mind. His daily triumph over chaos repeated only to face the same silent wall again at dawn. The profound exhaustion of this existence is not the physical fatigue of the free world, but the slow, deep weariness of the soul that has endured prolonged sensory deprivation. We have borne witness to the price paid for absolute institutional safety. 23 hours of profound stillness, countered by one single, rationed hour of light and air. Now, as we conclude this long journey into the quiet architecture of confinement, allow the imagery to soften and the harsh edges of the concrete to dissolve into the deeper, gentler shadows of your own surrounding space. This dissolution is a crucial step in preparing the mind for its necessary nocturnal retreat. Allow the heavy themes of conflict and betrayal to recede from the forefront of your thought, sinking beneath the still, smooth surface of approaching slumber. Let the final metallic clang of the steel door fade entirely, replaced by the smooth, steady rhythm of your own breathing. The profound stillness of the supermax, which was a source of terror for the men contained within, can now, for you, be transmuted into a source of peace. You are no longer the witness to a struggle, but a participant in the deep stillness that precedes true rest. As you settle deeper into your place of comfort, imagine the vast, indifferent tranquility of the sequoia groves that surround Pelican Bay. They stand as silent, rooted giants, their immense age dwarfing the small, frantic span of human time and human conflict. They draw their strength not from sudden action or dramatic movement, but from patience, from the slow, measured process of growth that lasts for 1,000 years. Let that slow, ancient patience enter your body now. Allow your own processes, the beating of your heart, the circulation of your blood, the quiet maintenance of your being, to be governed by this deep, slow, natural rhythm of the earth. The external world, with its demands and its immediate anxieties, now retreats, moving 100 meters away, just like the mainline prison recedes from the SHU. You are entering a state of necessary separation, a deliberate exile from the pressures of the day. This exile is temporary and restorative. Feel the heavy, supportive weight of your head upon the pillow. This is your personal stone, not a burden to be rolled, but a stable anchor in the darkness. Allow the muscles around your eyes, which have been strained by the light of screens and the tension of focus, to soften completely. The meticulous study of law and the constant vigilance of the guard are no longer your responsibility. That labor is complete. There are no more equations to solve, no more foreign languages to memorize. The mind is granted its parole. We close the book on the silent rebellion of the milk cartons and thread, the genius of the improvised paintbrush, and the terrifying potential of the biological weapon that was the feather. These details of vigilance now surrender their intensity to the deeper need for surrender. Let the mind know that it is safe to cease its constant search, its relentless calculation of risk and reward. There is nothing left to find in the darkness. Focus now only on the rhythm of your breath, an inhale of slow, complete peace, and an exhale of gentle, profound release. With every outward breath, release the last persistent traces of anxiety, allowing them to dissolve into the air around you. The long, complex sentences and the detailed descriptions of the SHU's geometry have guided your mind along a predictable path, preventing the kind of unguided, chaotic thoughts that often keep the intellect awake. Now that guidance is gently concluding, there is no more information to process, no more consequences to fear, and no more questions that must be answered. The narrative's purpose is fulfilled. Imagine the corridor control of the security housing unit. Feel the slow, deliberate process of the heavy doors locking and unlocking. Now imagine that process applied to the different sections of your own consciousness. The door to worry is now locking, secured by a heavy steel mechanism. The door to planning is slowly sliding shut. The door to the memories of the day's obligations is closing with a final, echoing thud. Each door that closes is an assurance of absolute safe containment. You are entering a state of controlled, necessary solitude. But this solitude is not the terrible deprivation of the men who look at the blank walls. Your solitude is a profound gift of restoration, a deliberate pause in the constant demands of the world. You are safe, you are still, and you are supported. Recall the words of Fernando Medina, the man who endured 17 years, who warned of the psychological snap and the tragic retreat. You have navigated the stories of that profound darkness, and now you are emerging, unscathed and whole. Allow the awareness of your own wholeness to fill the space of your stillness. Your mind is no longer running away with itself. It is anchored in the deep rhythm of the moment. Feel the deep quiet of the night pressing in, not as an absence, but as a presence, a soft, supportive pressure that eases the tension from your shoulders, from your chest, and from the small, intricate muscles of your hands and feet. This pressure is the security of your own walls, ensuring no outside chaos may enter. Let the knowledge of this long, quiet history drift away, like the ashes of the Trojan War, drifting out to sea, no longer a source of conflict, but a faint, receding memory. This letting go is the final act of trust in your own body's process. You are releasing the narrative of the world to embrace the absolute narrative of sleep, deep relaxation, and anchoring. As the final, faint image of the prison recedes, we begin the deep, deliberate process of grounding the body in absolute comfort. Let your attention now drift to your physical form, that vessel which has carried you through the demands of the day. We begin with the extremities, the hands and the feet, the tools of movement and action. Feel the surface beneath your feet, recognizing their complete stillness. Imagine that any residual tension, any last frantic energy is slowly draining out of your soles, down into the earth, where it is neutralized and rendered harmless. Your feet are heavy, warm, and entirely relaxed. They are no longer required to walk, to stand, or to flee. They are anchored and still. Now, let this profound stillness travel up, relaxing the calves and shins. These muscles, often held tight from the stresses of the day, now lengthen and soften. Feel a wave of warmth spread through them, releasing any residual strain. The bone feels heavy, the muscle feels soft, sinking down into the supportive surface beneath you. We move to the thighs, the largest muscles of the body, the power centers that hold so much kinetic energy. Allow the weight of your upper legs to press deeply into your bed. Imagine that your thighs are slowly liquefying, becoming heavy and pliant, melting into the mattress. Release all resistance. The simple act of releasing these large muscle groups is a powerful signal to the central nervous system that the time for vigilance is over. Now, let your attention gather at your core, the center of gravity and the repository for hidden emotional tension. Notice if your stomach or lower back is still holding any tightness. With a slow, deliberate exhale, release that tension. Imagine the warmth of the air leaving your lungs is melting away any knot of worry held in your abdominal muscles. Your core is soft, safe, and completely supported by the surface beneath you. This warmth now spreads to your back. Feel the supportive line of your spine, the central pillar of your strength. Allow each vertebra, one by one, to let go. Imagine a gentle, soothing light traveling down your spine, releasing the muscles on either side. Your back is flat, wide, and heavy, completely at rest. The effort of holding yourself upright throughout the day is over. We turn to the shoulders, those heavy, burden-carrying parts of the body that often hold the metaphorical weight of all our obligations. Consciously allow your shoulders to fall away from your ears. Feel them broaden and sink deeper into the pillow. This is a crucial release. Notice the difference between holding and letting go. Your shoulders are soft, slack, and heavy. This soft, melting sensation now moves down your arms, through the forearms, and into the hands. Release the grip in your fingers. The hand is an instrument of precision and control. Now, let that control go. Your palms are open, your fingers are gently curled. and your hands are heavy and warm. They are the hands of a sleeping child, completely without purpose or intent. Finally, bring your attention to your neck and jaw. These are the last, most stubborn reservoirs of tension. Allow your tongue to fall away from the roof of your mouth. Gently part your teeth, letting your jaw hang heavy and slack. Notice the quiet, continuous effort required to simply hold the jaw closed. And now, release that effort. The muscles of your neck, which balance the weight of your head, are now softening, allowing your head to feel profoundly heavy and stable upon the pillow. The only remaining movement in this quiet, heavy body is the gentle, steady rise and fall of your breathing. The air enters slowly, filling you with warmth and deep tranquility. The air leaves slowly, carrying away any lingering fear, any remaining tension, any final attachment to the world outside your walls. You are contained, not by concrete and steel, but by the soft security of your own surroundings. You are safe, not by the presence of an armed guard, but by the natural, ancient rhythms of your body preparing for sleep. The journey of stillness. Now that your body is heavy, soft, and still, allow your mind to follow the rhythm of your breath as if it were a guide, leading you deeper into the quiet sanctuary of rest. We move past the simple relaxation of the muscle and into the profound tranquility of the mind. Imagine your consciousness is settling onto the surface of a deep, dark lake. The water is perfectly calm, black and smooth, like polished glass. The heavy themes of the day, the lists, the expectations, the regrets, are the disturbances on the surface, but they are now fading. They are ripples that dissipate before they reach the shore. You are the deep water itself, vast, still, and untouched by the surface movements. With each inhale, feel the profound patience of the sequoia trees. Let the wisdom of the thousands of years settle into your breath. You have all the time in the world, the urgency that governs the daytime mind, the 10-minute clock of the prison meal, the pressure of the deadline. These concepts no longer apply. Time is slow, time is gentle, and time belongs entirely to you. We are leaving behind the architecture of control and moving into the architecture of peace. Imagine the concrete walls of the SHU, which were built to be rigid and unyielding, now begin to soften. They transform into thick, comforting layers of deep, soft fabric, velvet, wool, and heavy silk, surrounding you not with confinement, but with absolute safety and insulation. The ceiling above you stretches into an endless, vaulted arch of deep indigo, a protective space that is vast and unthreatening. The only light present is a soft, continuous glow, like distant starlight filtered through a heavy cloud. This light is not harsh, like the fluorescent lamps of the cell. It is the soft, ambient light of deep peace. It is just bright enough to be gentle and dark enough to encourage the eyes to remain comfortably closed. Let your mind now perform a final, gentle check of your physical security. Notice the weight of your eyelids. They feel heavy, pressed down by the smooth, soothing fatigue of a long, sustained focus. Let them stay sealed, protecting the inner sanctuary of your visual field. Notice the sound space around you. The distant, faint sounds of the world are now categorized and dismissed, like the SU guard categorizing contraband. The wind outside is not a threat. It is a soft lullaby. The sound of a car passing is simply a reminder that the world is moving and you are not. You are stationary, safe, and sound. These external sounds reinforce your internal stillness. We continue the journey deeper, focusing on the release of internal burdens. Let us release the weight of all unkept oaths and unfulfilled expectations. The debriefing process requires the betrayal of a gang. Your process requires the betrayal of the impossible standards we set for ourselves. Let go of the need to be perfect, the need to be busy, the need to be alert. Those contracts are terminated for the night. Imagine that your mind is now placing all remaining obligations onto a small, perfectly balanced scale. See the scale hovering, perfectly balanced, and then gently dissolving into mist. There is no imbalance left. There are no debts to be paid until the light of the morning. You are financially, emotionally, and physically solvent for the duration of this darkness. Feel the profound luxury of your safety. Unlike the men in the PC unit who must constantly look over their shoulder, you are safe from betrayal, safe from violence, safe from the unseen knife. Your walls are sound. Your door is sealed by trust, not fear. Allow this deep physical security to permeate your resting state. You are not a target. You are simply at peace. Your journey is complete. Your mind has accomplished the difficult labor of bearing witness to the darkness, and now it is rewarded with the light of profound rest. The final, continuous rhythm of your breath is the only sound that matters now. Let the final, conscious thought be a repetition of the word stillness. Let this single, resonant word echo quietly in the receding chambers of your mind. Stillness in the eyes, stillness in the hands, stillness in the heart. Stillness. This profound, heavy silence is your final destination. You have earned this rest through attention and through release. The work is done. The sentence of the day is served. Go now to the deepest, quietest place. This concludes our journey into the quiet history of the Supermax. We hope that the measured cadence and detailed narrative have provided a soothing anchor for your mind, guiding you gently toward a state of profound rest. If this experience has brought you comfort, if the rhythm has helped you to settle into the quiet of the night, we invite you to take a moment before you fully drift into sleep to subscribe to our channel. Your support is the silent current that allows us to continue bringing these long, deeply researched narratives of history and psychology to the air. And if you know of others who seek refuge from the turbulence of the world in the quiet authority of a good story, please consider sharing this episode with them. The gift of a night's rest is a simple, profound one, and your willingness to share helps us reach those who need the stillness most. For now, thank you for listening. Rest well. Good night.